I want to take a moment to ask you all to close your eyes. Breathe in and breathe out. Now, take a moment to recall a challenging moment of your childhood that changed the course of your life forever. Recall what happened, how you felt, and how the challenge unfolded. Now open your eyes again. The challenging moment that you just thought about, I want you to keep hold of it until the end of my talk. Now I'm going to tell you about a challenging moment of my childhood that changed the course of my life forever. To give you some context, I was born in London and relocated to the Middle East at the age of 3 years old. I grew up in an unstable household where abuse was the norm and every day held new challenges. My mother suffered from severe mental health issues, leading her to be very violent towards my father and I. I was often beaten up for expressing my own views and opinions, especially if they conflicted with my mother's. This eventually led to my parents' divorce and subsequent custody battle, where my mother kidnapped me at the age of 8 years old. My life in an instant was turned upside down, and I lost everything that I cherished. The normal life that an 8-year-old girl should have had was taken away from me. No phones, no friends, no school, and especially no freedom. Before I was kidnapped, my father was suspicious that my mother might do something to me. He left with me a secret telephone that was stuffed inside a teddy bear, which was our only hope for communication. Genius. This was our only hope for communication when my father's foresight proved to be true. However, he did not leave a charger with me. And actually, we were unable to communicate for several months during my kidnapping. During this period, I was taken across various flats where I experienced physical and mental abuse. At the mention of, "Mom, I want to see my dad," I was beaten up and told to never utter those words again. After constant abuse and suffering, I naturally started to question the meaning of life and contemplated suicide many times. Though there is a moment that I'll never forget, the moment that I decided I was indeed going to jump from the window of the apartment block that I was kept in. Beforehand, I sent my dad an email like this: "Dad, I'm so worried, very stressed, just had enough, don't care about jumping out of the window. I love you, I'll do anything to get to you." I'm sure that the broken English in this email highlights my distress in that moment. That was it. I was going to jump and be freed from all this pain. But something remarkable happened in that moment. I heard what I could only describe as the voice of an angel saying these 3 magic words: never give up. To this day, I truly believe that was divine intervention. Finally, after several months, I managed to get hold of a phone charger and made that critical call to my dad. It felt like an eternity since I'd heard his voice. I remember telling him what had happened these past few months and hearing the distress in his voice. But something shifted on that call, and there was a feeling of hope again. I remember saying, "Daddy, here's my location and how you can find me." And his reply back was, "I'll never give up on you." After my mother moved me yet again, I lost contact with my father, but through the help of the police, he managed to find me and rescue me. The feeling of being reunited with a loved one after what seems like eternity is honestly possibly one of the hardest feelings to put into words. To this day, I still remember having the biggest of a hug with my dad and pinching myself because I thought I was still in a dream. During the court case that proceeded, I mustered the courage to speak up for myself and express my wishes to be with my father. As an 8-year-old child, standing in a room full of solicitors was probably one of the most terrifying things I've ever done in my life. But reuniting with my father was just the beginning of a long journey to rebuilding my life. When we returned back home, I was seriously behind in school, socially isolated and broken. But I never let what people said about me or statistics hold me back. Instead, I use my pain and experience to propel me forward in life. The words that echoed in my heart during my darkest hour, "Never give up," fueled my determination to persevere. So the challenging moment of my life was when I was kidnapped by my own parent. Parent-child abduction, ladies and gentlemen, according to the Journal of Criminal Justice, is the hiding, taking, and keeping hold of a child by a parent whilst denying the rights of the child's other parent or guardian. In the US, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, approximately 200,000 children are victims of abduction a year. In the UK, the Reunite International Child Abduction Center reported handling 447 new cases of abduction involving 675 children in 2018. What is even more shocking to me is the general lack of understanding of the subject. A research piece commissioned by the UK government in 2012 highlighted that less than half of the UK population are aware that the government can intervene to order the return of a child back to the UK. And I'm sure that probably a lot of you this evening can attest to those statistics. A PhD study by Professor Marilyn Freeman, a research fellow at Westminster Law School, highlighted some of the long-term issues that abducted children face when they're returned. In summary, they include psychological trauma. Children may experience anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Trust issues. Children are more likely not to trust other people later in life, especially family members. Identity confusion, which especially applies to international abductions. Educational disruption. Abductions can cause large gaps in schooling and academic challenges. Emotional instability. Behavioral problems. And then long-term relationship difficulties. Abducted children are more likely to struggle to form long-term relationships later in life. I too suffered from some of these problems when I was brought back to the UK. I remember having such bad PTSD that when my dad would leave the house, I'd ring him to come back home immediately because I was having a panic attack. My education was severely disrupted. I remember getting 21% in my 13+ exams and told that I could never achieve my dreams of getting into Cambridge University. I had to take extra classes with my grandmother and my teachers to be able to get my education back on track. But through never giving up, I eventually achieved my dream of getting into Cambridge University for my master's. And this is a photo from my graduation last year, which was definitely, thank you. Throughout my journey, I have observed that our society tends to reduce trauma survivors to mere numbers. Previously, I found myself swayed by statistical reports that I encountered, which told me that because I had experienced trauma and abuse, I was more likely not to achieve my dreams. Whilst informative, these studies can inadvertently label victims, potentially hindering their healing process. So I resolved to shape my own path and carve my own metrics. Some might view this as obstinacy, but I view this as self-determination. So you're probably wondering about how I overcame this challenge and achieved all that I've managed to thus far. I can tell you that it was not a linear journey, but there are some strategies that I employed which you can apply to any challenge you might be facing in life. The first one is forgiveness. I believe that the initial step in genuinely healing from trauma is to forgive those who have wronged you. And let's be honest with ourselves that forgiving someone who has done something terrible to you is a really hard step to take. Secondly is to assess your support network. I was lucky enough that when I was brought back to the UK, I was surrounded by my father and his loving family. So make sure to surround yourself with people that love you and uplift you. Then thirdly is to work on yourself and your mindset. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of Aristotle, and one of his sayings go like this: suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities cheerfully, not through insensitivity, but through greatness of mind. So I believe that an ability to know more about yourself, your strengths and your weaknesses can lead to further healing from childhood trauma. And then lastly is to learn from this experience. This experience gave me a plethora of life skills which I can apply to anything I face today, including TED Talks. It gave me an unyielding perseverance, which is a skill that I've continued to hone today, whether that be in my business or my personal life. Whilst I could honestly go on and on giving more tips and advice, so grab me at the end of the talk, my key takeaway is this. Recognize your capacity to learn from adversity and never let it dominate you. It was only through my ability to learn, adapt, and manage my thoughts, aided by prayer and the support of loved ones, was I able to surmount this trauma. For years following my abduction, the abnormalities surrounding my experience felt overwhelming. It took a decade to fully process what had happened. But the turning point for me came when my mindset shifted from a victim mindset to a victor mindset, recognizing my story's potential to empower and influence others. In 2019, at the age of 22, I gave my first speech to my prayer group at church during my undergraduate studies. Despite the nerves, the sweaty palms, and the slight stutter, I persevered. Afterwards, I was approached by friends aware and unaware of my story, amazed by my apparent normalcy. That moment planted a seed in my heart, revealing my life's calling to serve others by sharing my story. Since those humble beginnings, I've gone on to share my story through various platforms and public speaking engagements. I think over the past few years, my story has been one of determination and perseverance, recognizing my story's potential to motivate me through everyday life. Since my studies, I've gone on to start my own business within the tech and luxury lifestyle space. And last year, whilst I was competing in the famous competition, Miss Universe Great Britain, I started an Instagram account, which I called Rescued, dedicated to supporting the victims of abduction. Quite simply, they could book a call with me or a volunteer, and we could support them emotionally through this very difficult time. And trust me, I've had some very difficult calls with families who have had their children taken away from them. Sometimes I ask myself the question, why me? Why was I rescued and not the hundreds of thousands of children that experience this and are not rescued? Whilst I don't have the answer, I stand here as a beacon of hope that no matter what challenge you face, you truly have the key within you to overcome it. So I want to return to that challenging moment that I asked you to think about at the beginning of my talk. Whether your challenging moment was as dramatic as mine or not, I hope that my own story has inspired you to look at your own struggles with new courage and hope. Always embrace your journey, share your challenges, and remember that within suffering lies the potential for beauty, growth, and blessings. Thank you.